Great. So a little button should have just appeared on your screen to go ahead and continue participating in the webinar as it's being recorded. If you're not comfortable with the panel being recorded, you can email me at tcalvin, that's TCALVIN at uchicago.edu with any questions or concerns. This recording is going to be put up on the BMRC YouTube page after we finish editing the transcriptions. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'm really thankful to them for joining us today. It means a lot to be able to come together this way with the BMRC members, but for the community and other archivists to talk about something that I feel like we as archivists are starting to engage more with in a lot of ways, but at the same time, there's a lot of difficulties that we face and that we have to overcome together. So Dino Robinson is the founder of the Shorefront Legacy Center and a BMRC board member. Pam Hackbart-Dean is the head of special collections and university archives at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Liesl Olson is the director of Chicago Studies at the Newberry Library and a BMRC board member. And Allison Hinderleiter is the Lloyd Lewis Curator of Modern Manuscripts and Archives and Selector for Modern Music at the Newberry Library. And finally, Raquel Flores Clemens is a university archivist and Director of University Archives, Records Management, and Special Collections at Chicago State University, and is also the Vice Chairperson of the BMRC Board. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that Dino can get started. So a round of applause, a virtual round of applause for all of our panelists for joining us today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this seminar. Again, my name is Dino Robinson. I'm the founder of Shorefront. Identify as he, him, his. I am sitting in my home-based office where Shorefront began. The bookshelf that's to my right and the desk behind me was the original bookshelf and Shorefront desk before we moved out of this location, out of my home, into a location that we are using now. I'm going to begin sharing my screen. So Shorefront is an organization that documents the African American community along Chicago's suburban North Shore. This first slide is of a 1930s slide of a storefront that was located in Evanston. There is a photograph of an African-American female holding a African-American toddler male in a produce store. And I love this shot because this was given to us by a community descendant who moved to New York, came back to Evanston briefly, and now lives in Florida. But she wanted to make sure she left behind her family legacy. So she brought over with her a oats container that also appears in this photograph that has these several photographs in it and other documentation noting the location of this store. I proceeded to do an oral history of her at that point just to capture this moment. We love this because this really embodies how we engage with the community. So Shorefront services the Chicago suburban North Shore area. It's about 20 miles along the lakefront north of Chicago. And we specifically focus on Evanston, Glencoe, and Lake Forest, which all had long-term African-American communities, established communities. A little piece of trivia, Lake Forest had the first African-American and oldest in 1850, long before Evanston and Glencoe did theirs. But these stories can get lost when we don't talk to community members and engage in multi-generational community members. The area that we cover, Evanston is our major focus because of the longer term and larger population. I have a bar graph on this slide that shows the total population in Evanston, contrast with the African-American population of about 16,000 as it is at the time I created the slide. Thus, the demographic is downtrending, but families are moving into other surrounding neighborhoods. Glencoe and Lake Forest, I have their bar graph there, and then the 4 remaining suburbs, I've combined the total population with the total African-American population, with Kenilworth having the lowest population of about 4 residents to date. When I started Shorefront about 25 years ago and started talking to the community about what was happening here and how can I participate and what I'm trying to do, 3 questions had always been consistent with me. Why are you doing this? What do you know about our history? And you're not from here. And these 3 questions encompass what type of relationship you're supposed to build within a community to get that trust and maintain that trust. And we took that seriously as we developed Shorefront and our board and our board of advisors and honorary board. We made sure there was a touch in every aspect of community life here in Evanston and the North Shore. So we're able to address these questions. Why are we doing this? What do we know about our history? And establish that, no, we're not from here. You know, that could be an issue, but that should not be the standing issue of why you cannot be involved. So why did I do this? Because this history was not known. Individually, we know our stories, but collectively, we don't have the full picture together. And Shorefront tries to put that full picture together. What do you know about our history? We don't know anything about the history. All of you know the history. So let's share these stories so that it becomes common knowledge. And you're not from here. No, I'm not from here. But many of these leaders that you celebrate historically in your community also were not from here, and yet we celebrate them. So let's celebrate the fact that we are here and engaging a community, and let's move on. And those are some of the discussions I had with, and this is condensed, but these are some of the discussions I had with residents in the community to help garner and help establish a communication path and help build trust in the community. We further did this throughout the years with engagement within the communities, going into offices and speaking to people. This slide here has about 5 images, each representing types of activities that Shorefront engages in. One-on-ones, like with artist Ben Blount, who operates a letterpress office and does a lot of community engagement himself. So I was there one day to interview him and photograph some of the stuff we do so that we can capture the contemporary history that he's engaged in. Then we could contrast that with historical initiatives that have happened that relate to his trade. Right next to him is actress Tina Lifford, who we're able to showcase her birth home in Evanston, Illinois. And those who don't know who actress Tina Lifford is, if you watch the TV series Queen Sugar, she stars in that as Aunt Vi. She has starred in over 100 movies and plays and TV shows. But it seemed like Queen Sugar was the one that took over the top to make her a household name. By chance, her home is just 3 doors away from where I live, so this was a wonderful occasion to meet with her. We also engaged in a series called the Black Evanstonian History Makers, where we invite a senior in the community and a youth in the community to share their experiences and life and careers growing up in the North Shore. This is a public venue, always in public spaces. This one happened to be at Evanston City Hall in their art gallery. And they were surrounded by community members who want to listen in and engage and ask questions with these participants. And these sessions are recorded. We also deal with current events with the city staff and other entities throughout the North Shore to bring to light the historical context with current issues. In our case right now, we're focused on reparations, historical sites, and redlining practices that happen in the city of Evanston. And lastly, we engage families, multi-generational families. And this bottom picture here on the right is of the Childress family, who are 3rd and 4th generation sitting at that table. The youngest in the family, the gentleman in the blue shirt, who was my high school classmate, and he donated his family archives to Shorefront about 15 years ago. And this shot was taken a year ago when he brought his young family back to Shorefront along with his father to showcase the items that he donated to the archive and able to share with his family. We provided that conduit to engage families together. And with a lot of our programs that we do, we work with interviewing community members who have lived here for generations. And over the course of time, we've developed a collection of audio history that we are now digitizing and putting on an online platform called Shorefront Voice, where viewers can go there, look at, listen to the audio, and also review word by word PDF transcript to go along with that script, along with metadata. And this becomes a valuable resource for community members to continue to use in their projects, research initiatives, publications that bring together a greater context in the Evanston community. And we continue the engagement for that in-depth information. What do people have in their closets, in their attics? And let's bring them out and let's share them. Let's make this common knowledge. And this had multiple surprise discoveries, so many that I can't get to into the program here, but I do have one that I will pull out in the next slide. But in this last photograph here of a senior woman looking through a scrapbook that belonged to a community member that donated the scrapbook to our archives, she mentioned she was in a singing group called the Darnells. And I remember seeing an article about the Darnells in the scrapbook, and I brought it over to her to review so that I can record her memories of her being in that singing group. And that photograph is there, Lisa. You can see that in the scrapbook at the bottom photograph. And she is the last girl on the right. So for her to go down memory lane and talk about the singing group was phenomenal. But to get that engagement with the community, sometimes you have to be very careful of how you approach. And in this little sample here, I was trying to look for one particular person for over a year. And I would talk to people in the community, and they would tell me various different stories, whether she still lives in the area, whether she moved out, where she worked, maybe family members that may know where she is. Eventually, someone gave me the phone number to their sister, and I started calling there, and a woman would answer and always explain to me they're not available. But I always asked for the sister's name, not the person who I was actually trying to look for, because of course that was their phone number. But the conversation kind of went like this: "May I speak to Mrs. C, please?" And after my fourth or fifth phone call, the person on the phone would say, "Listen, if you're a solicitor, we don't need to speak." And she was pretty curt with that. And I knew I had exactly 15 seconds to explain myself. And I did, within 15 seconds. I'm Dina Robinson. I'm hopeful to talk to Miss Patty Drew to learn more about her historic contributions in music. It was like part of the last sentences that I had said to her. And there was a pregnant pause. And she said, "Well, I'm Patty." And I knew then I only had 15 more seconds to earn her trust. Turns out that she lived right around the corner from me. And so I went over to her home after she had invited me, and I brought a gift with me, some work that I was working on before with some historical context. I reintroduced myself and handed her the book through the chain-locked door as she peeked through with one eye. And I asked if there was a time later when she's comfortable that I would like to sit down and talk with her about her singing career, not to perform, but just her history that she can share with a younger generation. She closed the door. I heard some rattling around. She opened the door wide open and invited me in. We engaged in a 10-year relationship of sharing ideas, thoughts, life growing up in Evanston. And she shared with me at one point that a lot of her stuff that she collected over the years of her singing career was stolen from her. And as I began to talk to people in the community about her plight, I one day received an anonymous letter in the mail that were taken from her. And I later did some further research to find old 45s and albums where she was featured, and I brought her copies of that so she could rebuild her own collection. She ended up turning everything over to me. Lastly, I was able to find a video of her performing at American Bandstand. And with that, I was able to show her family these things, and it was just a phenomenal engagement where her grandkids were there and were able to share with each other their story. So in recap, our rules of engagement in community is always introduce yourself, not what entity you work for or your title, but who you are, who your family is, where you're from. Always ask permission to use things. So such as these images in the slide, in the video, I had reached out and talked to these families and asked permission again. Protect their legacies as well. Make sure that it's not being used inappropriately. You'll become the caretaker of their family legacies, and they depend on you to do the right things with them. Always give copies of your outcomes, whether it's a book, publication. Make sure they get a copy of it so they can add it to their own family collection. And constantly follow up just to see how they're doing and what they're up to. And so a lot of times they come up with new information. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dino. That was great. I love hearing, I mean, I heard the presentation before, but I love hearing about Patty and about the families that you engage with. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm leaving all my contact information in the chat.
Awesome. And I realized before we transition to Pam, you can go ahead and share your screen if you'd like. But in the meantime, while you do that, I just wanted to go ahead and give an image description of myself. I realized I forgot to do that. So I'm a light-skinned Black non-binary person wearing Black beaded hoops. I have short curly hair, and there's a lot of colorful artwork behind me on a lavender wall. Awesome. So Pam, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen so you can get to your presentation.
Hi, I'm Pam Hagbart-Dean, and I go by pronouns she, hers, and hers. And currently I have brown hair with a lot of white in it. Hopefully someday it will go back to its natural color of more of a blonde, haha. And I'm sitting in my office on campus at UIC. So I've been asked to talk about a project I was involved in at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And we started this project back in 2017. So next slide. The idea was to initially focus on assisting community members in Southern Illinois in the African American community to preserve and share their stories and personal archives. Originally, a community activist and business owner, Pepper Holder, was involved in the project. He was very active in the community and felt it was in the best interest of his community that their stories and their histories be preserved, and he wanted at least one place where these stories would be collected. We involved a history faculty member from the College of Liberal Arts and 2 archivists from Special Collections as part of this initial project team. And ultimately, our goal of the project was to help our community members and organizations and churches, mosques and temples be able to tell their own story in the way that was authentic and meaningful to them. And we were just there to provide advice on how we could do this. So the next phase that we went is that we held a community meeting in December of 2019 where we invited community members, church, religious leaders, leaders of community organizations to come on campus and discuss the idea of preserving the history of the African American community. And this initial meeting, we sent out press releases, we sent letters, we followed up and made phone calls, as well as putting notices in church bulletins around the area and things on social media, and we had about 30 people attend, and we discussed what the project was and how we could make sure that the community members could work with us, what we could do together to help preserve the history for the current and future generations. And a result of this meeting was we were able to identify potential churches, organizations, individuals who may have history information that should be preserved and would be interested in working with us towards this end. And so our first event was held 2 months later at the Baptist Church in Culp, Illinois. And you'll see some of the community members and church members that came to bring in some of their collections. And at the bottom, you'll see Dr. Pamela Smoot, who is a member of our project team, who was there to help look over collections and give advice on the best way to preserve them and see what the next steps the individual wanted to do. So the next step that we did was to, beyond the community events that we were holding at least once a month throughout most of 2018 and 2019, was to build trust within the community. We wanted to document the character of the community, the people that lived and worked in the community, and their activities, what's going on in their lives. And we felt the best way to build the trust was to make sure we maintained trust and accountability. And so we would volunteer to come to any event, whether it was to meet with individuals, families, or within organizations, to provide advice on how to do the basic preservation for their historical records. And if they so chose to donate their papers to an archives, the best way to work with an archives. We found many of the individuals who came to these events wanted advice on the preservation aspect. And if they wanted to donate, they decided to donate their papers. What they really wanted was to provide copies and have originals returned to them. Another thing was we wanted to make sure that these collections were going to be made available for the younger generation, students, family members, and community members now and in the future. And one way, and Dino even discussed this, was we began assisting with an oral history program where we would bring the equipment where community members could also do oral histories on their own, or if they wanted one of our team members to do the oral history, we could do that. And then we would transcribe them and make those transcripts available to the community members and let them decide if they wanted to make those available for research or keep it within their own family or organizational archives. So the next step we took is to really, during this time, what kind of records were we seeing? People were coming in and they were bringing their church records. A lot of that was anniversary or history books from that church, a lot of funeral programs. We were seeing a lot of high school reunion books that came in, but we also have community members bringing in copies of books about the African American experience, specifically in Southern Illinois. And so if the library at the university did not have a copy, then we knew we needed to get a copy not only for special collections, but also for the general collection. So there could be one place within our larger community that all these secondary sources would be available for our community members as well as our students on campus. So we want to make sure that we are doing our outreach in community. So we want to, any collections that had been donated to the university were processed immediately, and we would put the finding aids or guides to the collections online so that people would know what was available, We also sent out a quarterly newsletter to announce what activities were being done, what collections had been received, what collections were available. It was also a chance to talk about upcoming events. This was sent out to anyone who had been to any of our events or that initial planning meeting, as well as people that were just interested. We've also made it a practice that to attend as many, to become more active and part of the community. And so we would attend events such as church concerts, an anniversary, MLK Day, breakfast and luncheons, Memorial Day commemorations, and meetings of local organizations such as NAACP and the Women for Change. The most bang for our buck has been our Facebook page. Being able to also provide announcements on the Facebook page was also a place where our community members started placing photographs and small snippets of stories that happened within their communities over the past several generations. And it's a very active Facebook page, and there's always new things coming up that are shared for the community as a whole. What we want to know, what did we learn from our experiences? That you have to keep getting the word out. We have been, this project is really focused on 3 communities, and we want to be able to expand that. And the communities were Culp, Creel Springs, and Carbondale. But it wanted to grow into the 23 southern counties. We wanted to be able to get the word out, make sure that you are leveraging your local media. Being in a smaller region, it was easier to get more buy-in from the local television stations, the newspapers. There was a program on WSIU, which is a PBS station, but anytime events came up, we were able to call the local media and get coverage of that. We want to make sure that we're building relationships between archivists and communities, that we are just providing care and information and making that available without trying to be a dominant force. We want to be more of a member and not coming in and telling people what they need to save and how to save it. We want to be more giving guidance. And we also wanted to make sure that we're enhancing the collections in our own special collections, not only on secondary sources, but also our collecting areas, to make sure we're being more inclusive of our collecting areas. So the next step will be that we will continue our outreach efforts. We will expand projects outside those 3 communities, but we also want to work very closely with the local museums, historical societies, and community archives, so that we can have more of a collaborative spirit. And the university was willing to be able to provide assistance in making sure that there was more of a digital hub presence, that we could be able to share information so you knew where all the collections were, beyond just what was on the campus. And of course, being able to diversify our collections. And in 2019 December, the SIU system awarded this project a major award for their community efforts, and that provided some funding to be able to hire more students to assist with projects and also get more equipment to do oral history programs. So I will leave my contact information in the chat box, and thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pam. I really appreciate the way you talk about giving the agency back to the community. I think that's something that often gets overlooked. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and then reshare my screen so I can pull up Liesl and Allison's presentation, and then we can get on to theirs.
Maybe I'll go ahead and get started since we want to make sure everybody has the right amount of time. And our first slide, we don't talk about for a minute. So Tanya will have it up by then. I'm Liesl Olson. I work at the Newberry Library. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. To describe myself, I'm a white woman. I have blonde hair. I'm sitting in front of a bookcase, which is the neatest part of my home. And I'm going to tag team with my wonderful colleague, Allison Hinderleiter. You want to describe yourself too, Allison?
Sure. Thanks, Liesl. My name is Allison Hinderleiter. I'm the curator of modern manuscripts at the library. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a white woman with short dyed purple hair and glasses against a white background where you can see a window and a poster behind me.
So we want to start with just a first big thank you to the BMRC. The Newberry is really privileged to be part of this consortium and to work collectively towards the BMRC's mission. And a special thanks to Tanya Calvin for bringing us all together. It's great to have Tanya on board. We want to start with a few big points about the Newberry Library and also about what's particular to the Newberry as an institution. As many of you probably know, the Newberry has been around for a really long time. It was founded in 1887. And it's always been free and open to the public. Its reading rooms are open to anyone 14 or older. And in fact, the location right off of Washington Square Park in what's now, called the Gold Coast was chosen because of its, quote, highest usefulness to the greatest number. Those are the words of early Newberry trustees. So with this history in mind, the first point is this, that community engagement and collection diversification have looked different over time at the Newberry, over 130 years of serving readers and genealogists and scholars and teachers and students. Now, I think we can really honor the Newberry as a Chicago civic institution, but also not be afraid to acknowledge its history of whiteness and to make important changes that will ensure the Newberry's relevance for generations to come, especially in the areas of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. It's also really worth noting that our collections are much more diverse than many people realize, and we need to do a better job of making that known. The second point I'll leave to Allison.
Thank you, Liesl, and thank you so much to the BMRC for inviting us to be on this panel. The second point is in working with donors and donor engagement. I have been, as curator of modern manuscripts, working at the library in various capacities for about 19 years. And I've had the privilege of working with the previous two curators, Diana Haskell and Martha Briggs, who have laid the groundwork for what I do. And we have several curators working in various capacities at the Newberry and engaging donors in various ways. This type of work is not taught in library school, or I seriously doubt it's taught in history master's programs either. But it is learned through experience and through looking at what your predecessors have done. I keep in mind the 4 tenets listed on this screen when I am talking to either individual donors or organizations. The first is respect. The donor is the subject expert and the one most invested in the collection that they are donating. I've learned to listen much more than talk and honor what they're telling me. You respect the person and hand the microphone over to them. You get more and better information that way anyway. The second is empathy. It's very likely that the donor is coming from an emotional and vulnerable place, whether it is the papers of a loved one who has passed, or it is that person's lifelong passion or career. It can feel to them that they are experiencing loss. So empathy is extremely important. It could also bring up memories that might be traumatic for them. So you need to pick up cues from them. And again, to listen. And they need to be able to get the time they need if they need a minute to compose themselves. The third is humility. This is the recognition that your institution, which you are representing, may be perceived as a place of power and authority. It may be intimidating or uncomfortable to someone who is looking to donate their collections, and they may be suspicious of you. As a curator or an archivist, it is important to recognize that power dynamic and to come in with your ego in check. And if I need to say it again, to listen to what the donor is saying. And then the fourth tenet is transparency, because you need to make sure that you can meet the expectations of the donor, and you need to let them know if you cannot. It needs to be an open and transparent dialogue. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And if I may, I'd like to put in a plug for the BMRC's own legacy management resource portal on their website, which I think is an excellent starting place for both the donor and the institution to recognize their role in the donation process.
So with these points in mind, we want to talk about how our recent efforts at community engagement have very organically led to some recent acquisitions, some really exciting new acquisitions. So Tanya, if you'll go to the next slide. This past year, the Newberry, in collaboration with 13 other partner institutions, and you'll see their icons here, these partner institutions, across the city, led a project called Chicago 1919, Confronting the Race Riots, which I will put up in the chat, the website for that project. Over the course of the year, we engaged in public conversations about the history and legacy of the most violent week in Chicago history. We had programs on housing, education, migration, policing, and the media. We experimented with new modes of public engagement across the city, from poetry readings to film screenings, to an extraordinary bike ride through the South and West Sides, which began at the beach where Eugene Williams drowned 100 years ago. We moved through various sites where violence took place during that red summer. And now here's a slide, a photograph from the bike ride towards the end of the ride. We had over 200 people on that day. And you can see the Bronzeville organizer, Harold Lucas, in this photograph. He's the person in the back right, in the hat and the red handkerchief, and he's leaning on a bike. After his involvement in the 1919 project, Mr. Lucas donated his personal papers to the library. Now, there's a lot I could say about the 1919 project. It was a real civic effort, including the fact that we eventually got the mayor involved. I'll just emphasize 2 points. First, that the project purposefully got the Newberry outside of the building. It got us beyond the Gold Coast. Every single program but one was someplace else. Secondly, we did not envision this program at all to be about collection development. This project was about community engagement. It was about how to understand current racial divisions in the city by looking to the past and by listening to the voices of the present. So in the end, we did connect with people who were really interested in having the Newberry preserve their collection. So the next slide shows again Mr. Harold Lucas on that bike ride, the organizer, activist, raconteur, and Bronzeville preservationist. Since the 1970s, Mr. Lucas has worked to preserve dozens of buildings representative of the Black metropolis. I mean, he single-handedly saved the Supreme Life building. The next slide is a picture, a photograph of Dr. Eve Ewing at one of our 1919 events, where she read from her new book of poetry called 1919. Now, Dr. Ewing was one of our scholarly advisors on the project, and she was really with us every step of the way. One afternoon when she was at the library, I wanted her to take a look at the papers of Victor Lawson, which we have in our collection. Lawson was the publisher and owner of the Chicago Daily News. He also sat on the Race Riots Commission. After the riots, the governor of Illinois appointed 12 men, 6 white and 6 Black, to basically understand how and why the race riots occurred. And they came up, they wrote a 6 600 plus page report. And many of you probably know Eve's recent book. She's in conversation with that commission report. She quotes from it. And I was showing her the minutes from a meeting that Lawson attended where they decided that Dr. Charles Johnson would write the report. And I just wanted her input, and that led to a conversation about how the Newberry preserves and makes available to the public its material. And now we do have Eve's papers at the library. So Allison's going to say a few more words about those two collections.
Yes, thank you. If you go to the next slide, this is just an example of some material that are in the Ewing papers. On the right-hand side, the typewritten pages is her typescript for 1919, her set of poetry that Liesl was just talking about, with some of her handwritten corrections. On the left is a couple of periodicals where she's featured on the cover, the Chicago Reader and the literary magazine Poets and Writers. And then at the top left above the Reader article is a picture of her with some of her students from West Pershing School where she taught. Next slide, please. And then also from the Harold Lucas papers, I want to say we have the personal papers, and then his company papers or his organization, the Black Metropolis Convention and Tourism Council records are at Chicago State University. But these personal papers include, there's a photo album, there's a handwritten press release draft that he wrote when he was working to preserve the Jordan building in Bronzeville at 36th and State back in 1986. And then just an example of some of his subject files that are still in one of 39 boxes at the library.
So I think we just want to end by acknowledging that the Newberry cannot be passive about what it means to be free and open to the public. Sure, our doors are open to everyone, but they always have been. But does everybody feel welcome at the library? You know, what are the barriers to access, and how can we more actively engage communities across this Chicago? This is not something that we can be passive about, not now, but really not ever. One of our real takeaways from the 1919 project is that we're really better when we work collaboratively, when we work together with people and with institutions and communities across the city. Thank you. And
Thanks
I think
very much.
we'll hand it off to Raquel next, right? Yes.
And I'll put our information in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We have about exactly 10 minutes left. So if Raquel, you want to go ahead and share your screen, and then we'll probably end up going over time a little bit, but we can take some questions towards the end.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I had a little bit of difficulty with technology, so sorry for the delay. Give me a moment as I transition to share my screen for the presentation. And if I must, I will skip over some things to make sure that we keep with time. So I'm Raquel Flores Clemens. I'm a university archivist and director of records management, University Archives and Special Collections at Chicago State. Today I'm going to be talking about how to, and I've called this presentation Mind the Gap, how we can use Mind the Void, how we can use historical gaps in our collections for community engagement and for diverse collection building. So sorry, give me one moment. Can you all see the screen?
No, we can't. I don't think you've
Okay.
shared your screen yet. Yeah.
Okay. How about now?
Nothing yet. Oh, there we go.
Oh, not that screen. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so what do I mean by mind the void? So in short, we all know that there are.
Sorry, Raquel, can you just quickly turn on the captions to make sure?
Oh,
there we go. Thank you.
All right. And also let me backtrack a bit. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers.
Yeah,
And I identify as an African American Black woman. I am sitting in front of a white wall with 2 posters behind me, encouraging you to live your best life, make your life grand, and a poster from an event that we did at Chicago State Icon of Black Panther art exhibit. So
click the button that says allow to access the microphone.
Okay.
At the top left corner. There you go.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay. So what do I mean by mind the void? So again, we know that there are historical gaps in many of our collections, and especially when we are talking about diversifying our collections, oftentimes that means disrupting a white male-centric collection that has been built around ideologies and principles that support whiteness and that supports eliminating folks of color from the historical scope. So in knowing that there are gaps, and as we assess our collections to identify those gaps, it's important to remember that there's power in the gap. And the reason why I say that is because power is what built that gap. And if you engage that gap, you can identify, what's missing, so you can then draw out conversations about it. Also, neutrality is a myth in our profession. Even though conversations around neutrality being a myth is becoming more present, but the idea of neutrality really does hinder diversifying your collection. So, I very much bring my all and bring myself and all of my experiences to my work. I'm about people-centered collections, and understanding that oftentimes our collections are built from a frame that's top down. You start with executive leadership within an organization, and oftentimes collections are built around that, or it's built around histories that are more known and more present, but may not necessarily reflect the community in which that institution inhabits. And so in identifying, and I'm sorry, I think this is in the way, but in identifying that neutrality is there and is a myth. If you don't identify yourself and what you're bringing to the table, by default, you support, neutrality, and oftentimes that can possibly hinder diversifying the collection. I also mean to engage the gap. So, just because you do not have materials in your collection that is relevant to your institution or to the collection scope, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have conversations about it. And that's where public programming can be very useful and essential. And again, drawing out the conversation about the things that are missing, and then it also demonstrates to the public, and particularly to the communities that are missing from your collection. It demonstrates a meaningfulness. It demonstrates an interest that is not just popping up because something has happened in the public sphere. Maybe thinking about the social unrest this summer, I was taken aback by a lot of institutions that put out statements of diversity, but yet their record doesn't necessarily show that. So engaging the gap and being intentional about that, you can use public programs to have these conversations. And that's what I found myself doing when I came to Chicago State. I've been in Chicago State since 2016. And the first thing I came in as the new archivist was understanding how my predecessors went about telling the history and engaging in the history, finding out what were the conversations that they were having, and how were they amplifying the collection that they already had. Oftentimes it doesn't necessarily require you to go outside of your institution to start collecting immediately. Sometimes you can have the materials that diversify your collection already in-house. And so I'm very much understanding that I am working within the legacy of my predecessors. The first two archivists, the archive at Chicago State is really, in terms of formal establishment, not that old. It was formally established in the late 80s, although the reference department always collected the history in some way, shape, or form. And the first two archivists did not identify as African American, and that's important to mention because Chicago State is a predominantly Black institution. It's one of the oldest institutions in the state. It is Chicago's first teacher training school, and so it's the oldest public institution, or public university rather, in the city. And it is one of two institutions of higher learning in Illinois that has the minority serving institution designation. And so that's important to mention because that is, reflective of its student body, and you would think that it would be reflected in records. It's an institution that is not just sitting place in the community. It very much is of the community. And that's something that I encourage other institutions and those who are doing the work, the memory work, to understand that, that you are of the community, right? And so that in itself should encourage you and influence you to keep your ear to the ground about what's important to that community and seeing how your collections will connect to the community and are relevant to the community. And again, help you identify where those gaps are. We're on the far south side at 95th and King Drive. But for most of its history, the university was in Inglewood. And even though it's a predominantly Black institution, it was not that way for the entirety of its history. The institution transitioned to a predominantly Black institution. It was a predominantly white institution for most of its history. It was founded initially in Blue Island and then moved to Inglewood, where most of the life of the institution was, and the student demographic changed with the changes in the community. And that pendulum really swung towards it becoming a predominantly Black institution in the late 60s. And so there was racial tension and racial strife that, me being from Chicago, I was born and raised on the west side of Chicago. I had community members as well as family members who attended Chicago State, and I knew of the stories and some of that racial tension that existed within the institution in the late 60s and 70s. But I was a bit taken aback that I didn't see it pronounced well in the record. And so in discussions and it was interesting, especially I came at a time where there were some significant things happening at the institution as it related to the state budget impasse. And so I was intentional about drawing out what I could to make sure that people understood the connection and how the history of the institution still influenced the history of the institution in terms of racial strife and racial tension, how it influenced the institution to, presently, because it really did impact how the history of the institution was told. If you speak to anyone from Chicago State College, because that's Chicago State College or Chicago Teachers College, because that's what it was known for most of its history, you would hear things like, "Oh, I'm an alum of Chicago Teachers College." They wouldn't necessarily claim Chicago State University, and those who graduated when it became Chicago State University in the early 70s, they say, "I'm Chicago State University," and don't necessarily connect with the history prior. And so that was a gap that I recognized that needed to be bridged. And so I started to do that with various different programming. And also I'm very much of the notion of encompassing the entire history of Black people, including liberation movements in moments in time that are impacted by what some historians will call radical liberation activities. So, and again,
I'm just trying to be cognizant of time. We're at 3
right.
o'clock, but please finish your presentation.
Okay. And so, again, understanding that gap was there, and understanding that, being in the lineage of my predecessors, my immediate predecessor, Aisha Hakel, really did start to draw out the narrative of the university as it currently existed in terms of it being a predominantly Black student population and being an institution of color. Like we also have a strong Latinx population as well as a strong international student population. And so under my predecessor's direction, there were more conversations around, again, the history of African Americans in the community, in the institution, and then collections started to come in under her direction that allowed me then to inherit that and to engage with that. So just, you know, a quick synopsis of what the University Archive does, and we are the Department of the Institutional Repository. So the activity of records management automatically builds a collection. And so again, it kind of easy access to start to engage in the gap that's not necessarily really public in terms of engaging its records. Some of our strengths are educational history, social justice history, African American history, neighborhood history, and those things influenced then public programming that I ended up doing to connect the various histories with the institution and the community, which also is in alignment with the university's mission statement, which is to teach, research, and service and community development that includes social justice, leadership, and entrepreneurship. So this is, and I'm missing the slide. I actually wanted to show you all, one thing that I did was understanding that there are connections between the city and various histories. So we were the home to Gwendolyn Brooks during the last 10 years of her life in terms of her academic home. And we also have a collection of Lerone Bennett that came in under my predecessor's direction, and under my direction, we are processing that collection, preparing it for public research and consumption. And so understanding that these two were not only colleagues, but they were friends, we had the great opportunity last fall to engage that collection, the Bennett collection, as well as the history of Gwendolyn Brooks at the institution. And we had a wonderful public program where their daughters were in conversation with one another, Giants Among Us. We also engaged, we also engaged, again, conversations around liberatory practices and activities in the Black experience. And so we had a wonderful public program where we were able to invite members of the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords, who talked about the legacy of the two institutions, how the Black Panther Party was influential in coalition building, and we again amplified the legacy of Fred Hampton, which is really important when we're talking about those histories, and and supporting, correcting those histories. And then also you see a picture on your right with Judge Eugene Pincham. We have a strong representation of folks who were in politics and who were judges and lawyers. And so engaging in those conversations, by having these different events and these different conversations, that also gave people in the public interest and let them know that we were serious about, engaging in these collections, and increased interest in folks wanting to donate their things. Another program that we did was around Afrofuturism. We've had several programs around Afrofuturism, and that we did the Black Speculative Arts Movement last spring, where we had a wonderful panel wonderful panelists that talked about, the politics of stating outright Black people are in the future, and why that's a political statement. It shouldn't be, but it is, and connecting that to the past in terms of rethinking about history and speculating on what could have been if Black people's narratives wasn't disrupted by oppressive systems, by slavery and social injustice. And so that's pretty much all that I have. And again, if anyone has any questions or want to know more about collections that we have at Chicago State and collections that are pending, because of the Afrofuturist framework that we're engaging in also has gotten interest, and we're in the process of bringing in the collection around of artists who are engaging in the Afrofuturist framework. So if you want to know more information, please feel free to contact me at Chicago State. My information is here on the screen, and I will would love to speak with you and look forward to connecting with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raquel, and to all of our panelists. That was really wonderful. If you all have to head out, that's okay. I linked our evaluation form in the chat. Please fill it out if you get a chance to. I'll also email out the link and the contact information for our panelists in a follow-up email following the end of this panel. So if our panelists are willing to stay on for questions for a bit, we'll do maybe about 5 or 6 minutes. We had a question in the chat that Dino, in the Q&A actually, that Dino answered that is really great that I want to bring up. And it's from someone asking, how do you engage with communities that don't necessarily want to engage with you or aren't actively, that you are aware of, thinking about preserving their history?
I can verbally say what I kind of wrote back in the Q&A. These are the things that you have to prepare for not being accepted at all. So you have to go at the pace of a community. If the community does not want to do anything or engage, then you have to respect that. But what you can do is continue to engage in any way that is allowable for that community for you to engage in. But the big part on your own end is just to prepare yourself for when that engagement can happen. You never know when it will happen, but if you can prepare yourself for that opportunity, you're that much more ahead.
I would like to add to that, and I think all panelists touched on it. You know, understanding that when you engage with the community, you represent your organization, and so understanding the history between the community and the organization is key, because there is tension there. Because whether intentionally or not, institutions do pose a threat to livelihood to communities, especially if they are the ones that are, tearing down buildings and taking over spaces that were formerly of the community. That's often a common thread with various institutions and their surrounding areas, especially if they're in residential communities. So I think what many of us already touched on is key. Show up in the community. Get your face known out there, and don't just show up when things happen in the, in the world. If there's, social unrest and uprising and such, that's not the time to show up. That's not the time to show up trying to get things either. The time to show up is when things are quiet, and showing that you understand what's happening in the community, and either, figuring out ways that your collection already supports things or that are happening in the community, or truly, as Allison mentioned, engaging with the community to listen and to see how you can be of support, and not necessarily having the mindset to always go get the things out of the community. We actually have a digital collection in Chicago State International Sons and Daughters of Slave Ancestry, where we don't have the things. We provided support and an opportunity for digitization with that organization, where we support managing their digital records, and they used our equipment to do that work, but they still have it in the community. So there's a tie there in the community that's a bit more genuine and long lasting. And then also too, again, engaging in public dialogue and public programming about things that are relevant to the community, even if you don't have it represented in your space. And that's a way to show interest and a genuine intention about supporting the community, as opposed to just building relationships to get the things. And so I think that can be, that you can incorporate that in your strategy in building community trust.
Awesome. Does anybody else want to take a shot at that question?
I would echo all of that both Raquel and Dino have said, just to say that it can take time. I've had conversations with potential donors that have lasted years, dialogues where people are not sure, they're skeptical of what an institution might do with their records. And so you just have to keep those lines of communication open. And like Raquel said, to reach out, and Dino said it as well, to reach out and keep in touch with those people and those organizations. And like I said, keep the lines open for communication both ways.
Great, and I think we'll take just one more short question, and maybe 2 or 3 you want to answer. The question from the chat is, how have you adapted some of your engagement activities to COVID? Which I think a lot of people, this is on a lot of people's minds.
I'll just jump in quickly. The Newberry has a really robust series of public programs, and we're always trying to find silver linings in the pandemic. because nothing substitutes for being in a place with other people, a physical place. But we will say this: our scholarly seminars, as well as our public programs, are booming in a remote way, right? Our virtual public programs and people are now joining from across the country and across the globe to come hear conversations around issues that really matter now, whether it's a deep look at voting and voting rights, or the Latinx vote. We've had programs about that, or books about Chicago where the author speaks. We've had all kinds of programs and incredible numbers. And so in some ways we've adapted in the ways that everybody else has adapted via Zoom. Right. But we are, in fact, I think, drawing casting a larger net. Our exhibitions, we're still free and open to the public on the first floor. We've been still opening our doors in terms of our exhibitions. We had an exhibition up about the election of 1920. A return to normalcy was what that exhibition about, and also an exhibition about Renaissance invention. Given this week, we've had to shut down again, but our exhibitions have still been running.
To that, Shorefront has been actually busier more during COVID than we were beforehand. A lot of oral histories, a lot of people wanting to utilize the archives for what I call, in generic terms, product, whether it's a report, an exhibit, book, a slide presentation. That's a new way. We're looking at new ways of getting our material out there for the audience to use and make it living again. That's one thing that we're kind of focused on in COVID, and trying to find ways of making what we do and making sure that there is a online digital media version of whatever we're researching and working
on. Same at Chicago State. We have seen in the archives, we've seen an increase in just in interest and in research requests, just because the need is there. Since no one can travel, folks are still needing to do their work. And so we are just, I am a lone arranger, so I'm the only archivist at my institution, although I do have a small staff that supports. But as you can imagine, that presents challenges during COVID. But we're still taking research requests. We also have seeing a need and a desire for more public programming online. The archives was involved with the university's effort, particularly at the Gwendolyn Brooks Center, the Black Writers Conference, where we were very integral in that program, doing demonstrating our collection through the video archive that we have of the Black Writers Conference. And it was very meaningful. We were intentional and meaningful in connecting it with current events, because we had not only clips from Gwendolyn Brooks and just her legacy, which is still very relevant today, but also we had a clip of Sonia Sanchez, who did an amazing performance of a poem that it was almost prophetic. She literally in the poem talked about everything that's going on today. Children immigrant children in detention centers, violence against women, violence against immigrant families in detention centers. The current ills of police brutality and such in the Black community. Like it was when I came across the script and came across the video, I was like, we have to clip that and put it in the conference. And so that, we got a huge turnout, a large registration. And then also the archives also engaged in a public program about land right and ownership, where Free the Land, it's a book by Dr. Ed Onachie, and we talked about, again, that is a conversation that's largely missing out of our collection, but we engage with it and starting to build on it with the collection from Harold Lucas with the Black Metropolis Tourism Convention Council. So that was a wonderful program that we also saw a lot of interest in, and we were able to get into not only what does it mean to have land rights, but also what does it mean in terms of working in solidarity with our indigenous, with the indigenous communities here. And so again, I think while of course we all want the pandemic to be over, but it has presented an opportunity to engage a little bit more with the public, and folks are looking for something to do and to engage. And so that in that way, that's a silver lining.
Great. I'm aware of time. I know we're a little bit over 15 minutes over time, but I just want to thank everybody so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our panelists. I'm really taken aback by the power of what all of you have shared today. I really hope that our attendees and everybody who came and joined us loved it as much as I did. Like I said, I'm going to send out an email to all the registrants with information about not exactly when, because we're not sure, but eventually when the YouTube recording will be posted on our page. Also contact information for our panelists and a link to the evaluation form. So thank you so much and have a great day.